Welcome to NHL Quick Hits. I'm David Crosby here with Steele Roden, and we're back with another first-round series preview from the North Division. You can watch the other previews on our social media or YouTube channel, so go check those out after this episode. But this is a matchup you'll want to stay locked on here for. In Paul Stastny's 1,000th game, the Winnipeg Jets grabbed the win over the Vancouver Canucks. Thanks to a huge 4-point night from Blake Wheeler, the victory also clinched third place for Winnipeg, who won the big prize of having to face two of the top 5 players in the world in the first round as they go up against the Edmonton Oilers. Connor McDavid is officially unstoppable. 102 points in the regular season. He had 7 goals and 15 assists against the Jets this season. Edmonton went 6-0 in playoff series against the former iteration of the Jets franchise. So if Winnipeg wants to topple Edmonton for the first time, they're going to have to slow down McDavid. Is it even possible, and how can they do that still?
You don't slow him down. It's probably one of the hardest things an NHL player has to do in today's game is trying to slow down Connor McDavid. It's just really one of the hardest things just because he's so fast and elusive and so shifty with his stick-handling maneuvers. So it's the hardest thing, and Paul Maurice has to come up with a plan to figure out how to shut that guy down, as well as Leon Draisaitl. Probably one of the hardest things Paul Maurice will have to do is figure out what can we do as a team to lock this guy down. And for me, it's really about just clogging up the neutral zone, because Connor McDavid just grabs the puck in his zone, skates as fast as he can up the neutral zone, and he'll dangle through 3-4 guys on your team, and he does not care how he makes them look. He'll have their jockstrap hanging from the rafters by the end of the night. So for me, it's so hard to slow down Connor McDavid, especially stop him. But I think the biggest thing that they can do is get someone on his tail immediately. Don't let him leave his own zone without someone on his tail. And then when that person's on his man, on Connor McDavid, you got to clog up the neutral zone. Make sure you're on both sides of the ice. Don't let him come up the middle, and you can't let him get past your last defender. If that happens, then Connor Hellebuyck, save you, please. Lord, have mercy on your soul, because Connor McDavid will make you look bad. But it's really hard to slow down the fastest and the best player in the NHL.
Yeah, it's one thing to plan to slow this guy down, but when you actually try to put it into practice and just go back and look at his top 5 or 10 goals from this season, like you mentioned, he can dance through guys at faster speeds than some guys can even skate, and he's got the puck on the string. The guy is an absolute magician. But let's go back to sort of the team-on-team matchup, because one guy can't win a series alone. Winnipeg went 2-7 against Edmonton this year, and they allowed 31 goals. Luckily for them, their last line of defense is really strong. Reigning Vezina Trophy winner Connor Hellebuyck had another great season. I feel like this defense also took a little bit more of a step towards legitimacy on that defensive end after being what we would consider probably a bunch of no-names last year. I feel like some of them have made a name for themselves this season. So is Connor Hellebuyck great enough to lift the Jets past the Oilers if they're outplayed as badly as they were in the regular season?
I think Connor Hellebuyck is good enough to steal series from the Edmonton Oilers, but I don't think it's the case for this year. I just think Connor McDavid and Draisaitl are too good. Like you said, those guys can just dance around and make the team look foolish out there. So for me, I love Connor Hellebuyck. He's always been a top 2 goalie, in my opinion, just behind Andrei Vasilevskiy. But for this case against the Edmonton Oilers, even though I'm not very fond of Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith, either or wherever they start, I feel like it's just going to be a bloodbath between those two guys. But for me, Connor Hellebuyck, one of my top 2 goalies, I just don't think that's the case for him this year.
Yeah, it's going to be a really, really tough task for him to try to stop this offensive firepower. I'm glad you also mentioned that Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen tandem, because that definitely is Edmonton's biggest weakness. And if Winnipeg can kind of get this struggling offense they've had back awake and get some early goals in this series, maybe they can make a run at it here. But I think they really miss a guy like Patrik Laine. What I'm interested to see is the guy that they got back in that return and see what kind of impact can he make for this team, because Pierre-Luc Dubois, he's not a regular season player. He isn't a huge name, but we all saw what he could do in last year's playoffs, and I'm going to be watching him to see what kind of impact he can make on this series. I wouldn't be surprised if right from puck drop, he is the guy who is matched up against Connor McDavid to try to slow him down. Now, we've mentioned a lot of the superstars already. McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, they're both elite talents. The Jets, they know their assignments. They need to slow those two guys down. Whose name do you think is written at the top of Edmonton's scouting report as the most dangerous offensive player on the Jets?
I think it's Mark Scheifele, no questions asked. And Mark Scheifele is their best player, regardless of how you feel. Blake Wheeler, their captain, Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle Connor, all of those guys are elite, no questions. But Mark Scheifele is their go-to guy. 21 goals on the season, 60 points for Mark Scheifele. He's been absolutely elite all season long for them. And exactly what I said before, guys like Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers who have really, really stepped up their game this year and have been able to get on the scoreboard a lot, fortunately for them. They have a lot of guys that are dangerous, but Mark Scheifele is that key guy that I would be looking at if I was on the Edmonton Oilers roster right now and playing them in a series best of 7. So Mark Scheifele just has been absolutely incredible this year for them. He brings a lot to their game as being one of their top players, and I think the Edmonton Oilers have to keep an eye out for him.
Let's finish this one off with a prediction as usual. How do you think this series plays out? Do the Jets get their first playoff series win against the Oilers?
They do not. The Oilers are going to smack around the Winnipeg Jets. Well, maybe not. I think it's going to be a fairly close series, actually, but in 7 games. And the only reason I allow it to go to 7 games is just because I have close to 0% of faith in Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith. Connor Hellebuyck is just better than both of those two guys combined, in my opinion. I would have put it to 6, maybe even 5 games, but just because of how bad I think Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen have been in the playoffs, sometimes Mikko Koskinen, especially in the regular season, it goes to Game 7, but the Edmonton Oilers get the job done.
I'm not a Koskinen fan either, but I do have to say I like Mike Smith a little bit more than you. He does run a little bit hot and cold, but he's been more hot than cold this season. So I do think at least for one series, especially this one against a Jets team that has really struggled to score to end the season, I do think the Oilers are going to handle him. And maybe, we both picked the Leafs in our other series preview to win. Maybe it's just because I want to see McDavid versus Matthews in that second round, but I'm going to also have to agree with you going with the Oilers, and I think they get it done in 5 games. That's all the time we have on today's episode, but tune in for more playoff previews this week. On behalf of Steel Roden, I'm David Crosby, and thanks for tuning in to NHL Quick Hits.